Senior advisor, Project Lincoln, whatever that is. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. Abraham Lincoln. Oh my god, such a leftist thing. Yeah, Lincoln was a fucking Republican, you assholes. I'm just saying. You know? How is it the Democrats, who are the Southerners who fought for slavery and were the KKK, become the representatives of the black people? Like, that's just one question I never had answered. Like, how did that come about? You know what? Let's give this one a Google, alright? When did Democrats become champions of the blacks? How blacks became democratic, the myth of single day, roughly 23, 25 black people. It's no political secret that African Americans are overwhelmingly vote Democratic. Democrats routinely see between 85 and 90% of the black community vote in their favor. In a country that so highly prizes democracy, one is left to wonder why there is such a disproportionate number of blacks that align themselves with only one political party. Surely the very notion of democracy implies that citizens are free to choose their political affiliations. With such skewed numbers, it is possible that African Americans are politically homogeneous beings and capable of independent thought. History would suggest not. There was a time when blacks were completely Republican. There was a time when blacks were legally prohibited from participating in the Democratic Party. How did such a drastic change occur? What prompted this mass political exodus? The article will shed light on the above questions and challenge some widely held beliefs about black political party identity. Following the Civil War, a series of congressional amendments were passed that sought to level the social and political playing field. They are popularly referred to as the Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to blacks, and the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. It should be noted that women of any color didn't receive that same right until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. As you may imagine, Southerners as well as a few Northerners were vehemently against this policy that extended black men the right to vote. Even noted advocates of women's rights such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were incensed at the concept that black men were given the right to vote before white women. The South was a largely agrarian, agricultural-based economy that was controlled by conservative Democrats. While the term conservative Democrats, known as Blue Dog Democrats today, may seem oxymoronic by today's standards, post-Civil War America was overwhelmingly Democratic and conservative in southern states. Conservative action, I don't know. Everybody has different meanings to these things, man. Like, I am a constitutionalist, the way it was originally written, like the first constitution, the original one that our forefathers wrote, the one that they piss all over now. And I'm against big government, because the more we we rely on the government. The more we ask them for shit, the more they take. And then it does not get distributed evenly. It just gets wasted and stolen. We lost $6 trillion. Oh, it's in the Sullivan Brothers building. Smash. No, seriously. Where was I? This is further evidenced by the South's strong reaction to the election of Abraham Lincoln, the country's first Republican president. Southern Democrats saw Lincoln and the Republican Party as literally taking the food out of the mouths by extending their rights of citizenships and political equality to their former slaves. With the majority of African Americans still residing in the South, Democrats feared for the stability of their economy. Hence, from the late 1860s through the early 20th century, blacks exclusively identified and tied their cultural ambitions to the Republican Party. So ingrained was the prejudice against blacks that the Democratic Party didn't formally allow blacks in its ranks until 1924. In 1924, blacks were allowed to attend Democratic conventions for the first time. Though they were allowed to attend conventions, blacks still identified heavily with the Republican Party. After all, it was the party who was responsible for their coveted freedom and liberties, not the Democrats. Industrialization and the Great Migration. Amidst a national change from an agrarian economy to a factory-based industrial economy, the early 20th century saw a myriad of changes taking place in America. Prior to American industrialization, 80% of African Americans will live in the rural South. However, during this new and exciting chapter in American history, that same population will begin to migrate to northern cities to escape the brutality of the South and seek better opportunities. As factories started to appear, blacks began moving north with greater aspirations of financial stability for their families. Now that they were not free labor or exploited workers in the tenant farming system, sharecroppers, they began to focus on issues of economic welfare, as many of their fellow Americans had been doing for so long. These economic concerns multiplied exponentially after World War I. Stock market crash in 1929. Gee, I wonder how that happened. And the Great Depression. The industrial North, which had once been likened to the biblical Canaan by black migrants, had now become a financially strapped wasteland devoid of the opportunities that lured them there initially. FDR. Almost sounds like the Federal Reserve, doesn't it? FDR, the New Deal. Yep. The 1936 presidential election, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would run on a new platform that emphasized the massive increase in government spending and support for the creation of programs designed to jumpstart American confidence in a failing economy. Gee, how did it fail? Oh, that's right. That's right. We let the central banks take over and print our money. And it took us off the gold standard and shit really got bad. This is a guy who says, oh, you can only have... Wait, was it this guy? Or was it the guy before? I think it was Harrison. Or Wilson. No, it was Woodrow Wilson who put us on the Fed. He did it at Christmas Eve with a damn near empty font chamber where he got the majority of votes that he needed. Alright. So this is part of history that I'm not too familiar with, so let's read on. 1936 presidential election, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would run on a new platform that emphasized massive increase government spending, support for creation programs, ready to part American confidence in the failing economy. He called this catalyst the New Deal. African American communities, leaders such as Mary McLeod, Bethune. Wow, it's a very New Orleans type name here. Felt for the first time in their history that blacks could voice their grievances to the government with the expectancy of a sympathetic understanding and interpretation. Despite good intentions, the New Deal did not eliminate segregation, the rampant discrimination in employment, wages, or working conditions that plagued African Americans for the last decade. Government agencies like the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps, National Youth Administration, and the Public Works Administration did not increase the number of blacks working. However, the New Deal was also responsible for a great number of job losses in the black community as well. Because of the increasing regulations placed on employers, many blacks who fell in the category of unskilled workers lost their jobs. They took our jobs. Unskilled and marginal workers like many blacks had difficulty finding work because of increasing taxes. FDR tripled federal taxes. Oh, you son of a bitch. You spend money and then you got to tax everybody for it. The taxes are technically unconstitutional. I mean, like, considering that we started this country based on we didn't want to pay taxes to a tyrant, I find it fucking oxymoronic that people actually fucking defend the theft of their own property. But whatever, let me just read one here. FDR tripled federal taxes between 1933 and 1940. The federal government's supposed to only have that 10 square miles in the District of Columbia. Basically, we're all supposed to be governed by our local authorities and state authorities. The locals are supposed to have more power or their own citizens than the state, and the state more power than the federal. But since we live in the clown world, everything's inverted, and basically, Satan has his minions steal from the innocent. Which be us. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Okay, so the New Deal spending also funneled money into several western and eastern states where previous election returns were known to be close. This would leave southern blacks out of the reach of much of the New Deal spending. So I'm guessing it's what New York, California, shit like that. While not aimed at or particularly effective for blacks, the New Deal provided a ray of light in the darkness of the American despair. In the 1936 election, Roosevelt would receive 71% of the black vote, and nearly that amount in 1940. Interesting. Never underestimate the power of propaganda. The irony here lies in the fact that despite receiving a large majority of the black vote, blacks didn't formally affiliate with the Democratic Party in large numbers between 1936 and 1944. Less than 44% of blacks identified themselves as Democratic. They may have never voted for FDR on the New Deal, but had clearly not forgotten the tainted legacy of the Democratic Party to which it belonged. What the hell am I looking at here? By executive order, President Truman wipes out segregation in armed forces. Oh, we're at war. They needed anybody can wield a gun to wield a gun at this point, so I don't think they had a draft because there's enough people volunteered. Anyway, here's Truman in the 1948 presidential election. So maybe this will give us some more answers here, because I haven't answered my question yet. How did this come about? Especially if the New Deal didn't do anything for black people. Just kind of like how every Democrat gets all the black votes, and yet they don't do shit for the black community. They're probably poorer and more subjugated now than ever before. At least they were sharecroppers, where the fruits of their labor gave them a share of the profits. They were incentivized to work hard. We don't get that shit no more. You just get a slave wage. All of us. Anyway, I'm sorry. Next major shift in black political party identification occurred during the 1948 presidential election. Harry S. Truman, Democrat, was elected president and would take home over 77% of the vote. Of the black vote. This can be largely attributed to Truman's desegregation of the armed forces and the issue of an executive order, which was illegal, by the way, or unconstitutional, I should say, because legislators, or to legislate, the president can veto it, or he can okay it. That's his job. His job is not to mandate rules. That's not how our government's supposed to work. But whatever. That's not why we're here reading this. Okay, so this dude, and through propaganda, and through TV, and through, well, whatever, through magic, we'll call it. Against racial biases in federal employment. Despite these noble efforts, it's worth mentioning that Truman had a less than stellar view of ethnic minorities. He used ethnic slurs when referring to Jews and Italians and was known to belong to a Missouri chapter of the KKK between the years of 1920 and 1922. So these are your champions. These are the Democratic champions. You have him. You have Admiral, or you had. Not Admiral Byrd, the other guy, who Clinton was like the protege of. He was like the Red Dragon leader or whatever, the KKK. Yeah. His brief association with the KKK came to an end over his desire to appoint Roman Catholics to keep... Oh my God, this dude was a Jesuit. To keep political positions, something the Klan was firmly against. I don't even fucking understand this one. Truman was currying favor amongst Catholic voters and could not afford to isolate this voting base. He would spend years denying these accusations of Klan affiliation. His civil rights-oriented decisions appear to be more politically motivated than a reflection of his personal affinities or disdain, as the case appears, for blacks. However, these two major policies also gave for the first time a majority of 50% of blacks that began to see themselves politically and to formally as Democrats. It is important to remember that despite 12 years of substantial black support up to this point, there are still a sizable number of African Americans who formally associated with the Republican Party. Republicans have always been the silent majority. The more I guess that's the very definition of conservative. Like, you know, try to do what's best for everyone. You know, I'm kind of a libertarian, but I'm also a conservative. Like, I don't know what I am. I'm not politically, I think they're all crooks. That's just my opinion. I think it's just a way of making people fight against themselves. But you're forcing people to choose sides. There's always two sides of every issue, you know what I mean? But common sense rarely ever wins out. You know, it's always the radicals that they have to use subversive means to get things accomplished, and by doing so, it further erodes and further corrupts our system to the point that it's about to fall apart. I mean, it fell apart. Yeah. Our government hasn't been a legal government since before the Civil War. It adjourned formally and never formally opened ever again. It just drafted another constitution making us a corporate entity, United States of America, but the United States for America. that life, liberty, and property, and the right to have those, turn into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because if you can't own property, then therefore you are property. And that's what we are. That's why we have strawmans. That's why when you were birthed through your mother's canal into this world, you're giving a fictitious name in all capitals so you can do commerce with these clowns. That is called a birth certificate because mom and dad, two witnesses from a merger of your two corporations, right? They bear off a child, an offshoot of the merged corporations, right? Mom and dad be like, hey, we have a child here. Let's call him da 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 da, right? And they put in all caps because it's fake. Anyway, since we don't back our money with silver or gold like the original Constitution says, what they do, it's a promise of debt. It even says on your money, it says this is a promise to settle debt. It's a promise of debt. Literally. It's enslavement. Because they take your straw man, figuring they're going to collect $3 million in revenues and taxes off of your sweat and tears. Because you're a slave. You don't really own anything. You can buy a house, but if you don't pay a property tax on it, they're taking the house away from you. And good luck trying to dig a well in your backyard because, that's against the United Nations agenda. You need permits to work on your own shit. You get permission, right? But then it's not really your own shit. You don't own it. Understand what I'm saying? Anyway. We'll save admiralty law and the law of the land for another time. So the election of 1952 saw General Dwight D. Eisenhower, or Ike, as some people call him, assumed the presidency and put Republicans back in control of the White House. Now, since this around this time, when it swings back and forth every 8 years, you get a new clown, established clown, whether it's douche or turd, they're established. So either way, even if our votes did count, which it doesn't seem like they do, because God, how many dead people vote? I think that mortgages gives power of attorney to certain entities, like banksters, even including your right to vote. And that means that after you die, that they seize your estate or your property because you owe them money, because you took out a death contract. That's what mortgage really means, death contract, right? And now, since they're in control of your estate and your fictitious name and all that shit that we were just talking about, well, they use that to vote legally, right? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Thank God, because I don't have the disposition for it. I'm not a moralist son of a bitch. I'm sorry, but I'm not a fan of lawyers or politicians. The word government means control, mind. Government, mind control. Imagine that. So, what we got here? Alright, so Ike, as he was affectionately called, was not known for progressive views when it came to civil rights. On the issue, he preferred a more quiet and constitutional approach that would avoid violent disruption in the South. This should not be misunderstood as neglect or apathy on his part. President Eisenhower achieved several notable accomplishments regarding civil rights that have gone largely ignored because he's a Republican, such as 1. The appointment of California's Governor Earl Warren as Chief Justice. Wait, that dude? The Warren Commission guy? The guy who probably is the guy who put out the hit on JFK? Oh my God. As the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Wait. No, I don't think it's him. Okay, the appointment of California Governor Earl Warren as Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court that led a unanimous decision in the landmark public school desegregation case Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. The careful and consistent appointment of Southern District's federal judges who were committed to equal rights, the eventual passage of the 1957 Civil Rights Act, along with additional voting rights legislation in 1960, precursor to the 1960s civil rights legislation, and finally the implementation of former President Truman's 1948 desegregation order, the deployment of elements in the 101st Airborne Division to protect black students at all-white Little Rock Central High School. Is that where Bill Clinton's from? Yeah. The first president to elevate an African American to an executive level position in the White House, and being the first president since Reconstruction to meet personally in the White House with black civil rights leaders. Because of these actions, he was able to take roughly 23 to 25% of the black vote in 1952. Okay, here again with my point. This dude actually does shit for black people. And yet he's only getting like a quarter to 40% of their fucking vote. And these cocksucking Democrats, well, they're all cocksuckers, but they pretend to be champions of the black people, but they're all from the KKK and racist bigots in secret, right? They use them to get their votes so they can get in office because they're radicals and subversive pieces of shit. And then what they do is they further trample all over the black community. And they use means of creating racism to get into power. I mean, like, what the fuck? Like, seriously. Where were we? With the black vote in 1956 and holding with the 1948 election, the majority of black voters still saw themselves as Democratic. These numbers, especially in 1956, show a noticeable decline for Democrats and a fairly substantial increase for Republicans that has still not been matched today. Once again, many African Americans saw themselves politically as Democrats. They're still not in proportion to the amount that actually voted Democratic. Something was missed here. Kennedy versus Nixon in the 1960 presidential election. The election of 1960 saw America's darling, John F. Kennedy, take on Richard Nixon. Despite JFK's liberal inclinations, he would only take 68% of the black vote. This is only a modest increase from the Democratic performance in 1956. Richard Nixon would take 32% of the black vote. Despite some questionable views on poor ethnic minorities, I attribute this modest increase by Democrats to JFK's decision to put Senator Lyndon B. Johnson on his running ticket. I don't think it's his decision, but whatever. Up to this point, LBJ from Texas and a devoted Southerner had consistently shot down. Oh, LBJ was from Texas. Good to know. Had consistently shot down civil rights legislation. This would definitely explain the public outcry by civil rights activists over Kennedy's vice presidential selection. The 32% garnered by Nixon is undoubtedly the residual effects from the Eisenhower presidency that many African Americans looked on favorably, including the author's grandfather. President Kennedy would win the election narrowly, carrying 49.7% of the popular vote to Nixon's 49.5%. Nixon won 26 states, while Kennedy won 24 states. The final electoral tally was Kennedy 3-3 electoral votes to Nixon's 219 votes. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson was thrust into the presidency, only to run a short time later in 1964 against Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. The 1964 presidential election would be a defining moment in American politics and a turning point of African American voting patterns. Goldwater versus Johnson in the 1964 presidential election. The presidential election of 1964 was perhaps the most defining moment in American politics. It marks the mass shifting of African Americans to the Democratic Party. LBJ would win the election with an overwhelming 94% of the black vote, with Goldwater carrying a paltry 6. Barry Goldwater. I mean, he had to be a straw man, right? So LBJ, I question his part in the assassination of his predecessor, especially just finding out that he was from Texas, and then the whole Watergate thing. I'm not a crook. You're a politician, my friend. You are definitely a fucking crook. Anyway. So, I still didn't get my real answer. How did these Ku Klux Klan motherfuckers, right? These slave owners, the Democrats, become the champions of the black people? Well, from what I'm guessing, it's people who don't know their history or didn't repeat their mistakes, or people are just so poorly miseducated or uneducated in this country that, they fall easy prey to propaganda and bullshit from a guy with a fucking nice smile. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you guys a little bit of my life for a few moments. This is what I do. I just look up stupid shit on the internet. Anyway, love you guys. Have a good one.